In Ironhaven City there are two ways to ruin your life. You can lie to the grinning king, or you can tell him the truth. Marcus Vale chose honesty. It started in a cold basement under an abandoned courthouse. Marcus sat tied to a metal chair, his wrists burning against rough rope. Across from him stood Victor Hale, the man people whispered about in fear, half his face calm, the other half twisted with something darker. Victor placed a small photo on the table. Marcus's wife. Alive. Frightened. Looking straight at the camera. Victor spoke softly, almost kindly. You work for a madman, Marcus. A man who would laugh while you die. Marcus said nothing. His throat felt like sand. Victor leaned closer. So here's the deal. Kill the grinning king, and she goes home. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus knew two things with absolute certainty. First, he could never beat Victor Hale. Second, no one in Ironhaven kills the grinning king and lives. Hours later, Marcus found himself standing alone on a rooftop. Wind rushed past him as he stared down at the streets below. The city lights looked distant, unreal. There was no world where he killed the king. No world where he saved his wife. So Marcus made a decision that felt less like courage, and more like surrender. Instead of pulling the trigger, he was going to walk straight into the lion's den, and tell the grinning king the truth. Marcus didn't remember how Victor Hale finally let him go. One moment he was tied to that metal chair listening to Hale calmly explain why his wife's life depended on a single bullet. The next moment Marcus was walking through the dark streets of Ironhaven like a ghost. The words still echoed in his head. You work for a sick man. Victor had said it without anger. Without fear. A man who will laugh over your corpse. Not because you're worthless, but because death itself is the joke. Marcus knew he was right. The grinning king didn't rule through loyalty. He ruled through chaos. People followed him because surviving near him felt like winning a terrible lottery. And now Marcus had been handed an impossible job. Kill the grinning king. Victor's final words repeated in Marcus's mind like a ticking clock. Do it. And your wife walks free. Marcus stopped under a flickering streetlight. His hands trembled as he looked at the small pistol Victor had slipped into his jacket. Cold metal. One bullet. The problem wasn't the gun. The problem was the target. No one in Ironhaven killed the grinning king. Not rivals, not assassins, not entire gangs working together. Every person who tried ended up as part of one of his twisted jokes. Marcus knew exactly what would happen if he pulled that trigger. He would miss, and the king would laugh. But if Marcus did nothing, Victor Hale would kill his wife slowly just to prove a point. So Marcus faced the truth, standing in the empty street. He couldn't kill Victor. He couldn't kill the king. And somehow, he still had to walk into the king's warehouse and look him in the eyes. Because sometimes the only move left is the one that guarantees you die. The warehouse smelled like gasoline rust and bad decisions. Marcus Vale stepped inside slowly. Every footstep echoed across the concrete floor. Dim lights flickered above stacks of crates and broken machines. This was the grinning king's territory. Marcus had been here before, but never like this. Never with a gun in his pocket, and a death sentence waiting. He saw him almost immediately. The grinning king stood near a work table casually spinning a knife between his fingers like he was bored. His bright purple coat looked almost glowing under the dirty warehouse lights. Pale face, wide red smile, eyes that looked like they were always waiting for something funny to happen. Marcus opened his mouth. Before he could speak, the king kicked him hard in the stomach. Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping for air as pain exploded through his body. The king laughed. Late, he said cheerfully. Marcus stayed on the floor trying to breathe. The king crouched in front of him, tilting his head like a curious animal. Now, do we have a problem? Marcus knew this moment would decide everything. If he lied, the king would know. And if he knew, Marcus forced himself to look up. My wife was kidnapped, he said. The words came out rough and shaking. Victor Hale took her. He told me to kill you. The king didn't blink. Marcus kept going because stopping felt worse than dying. He gave me a gun. One bullet. Said if I didn't pull the trigger, she dies. Silence filled the warehouse. Then the king slowly pulled out a pistol and pressed it against Marcus's forehead. Why? He asked calmly, would you tell me that? Marcus swallowed hard. Because I don't know what else to do. For a second, nothing happened. Then the grinning king burst out laughing. Oh, Marcus, he said, lowering the gun. This is fantastic. He stood up clapping once. Well then, let's go ruin Victor Hale's entire week. The next morning, Victor Hale stepped outside his mansion to collect the newspaper. Something wet hit his cheek. He frowned and slowly wiped his face. His fingers came back red. Blood. Victor looked up. One of his men hung upside down from the iron gate above him. The body swayed gently in the morning wind, a frozen smile still stretched across the man's face. Victor didn't panic. He simply sighed. Showtime, he muttered. That was the opening joke. By noon, 3 of Victor's warehouses had exploded across Ironhaven. Cars burned in empty parking lots. Several of his lieutenants vanished without a trace. The city felt different, like someone had flipped a switch. Marcus followed the grinning king through the chaos, barely able to keep up. The king walked through it all like a man enjoying a parade. At one destroyed warehouse, the king leaned against a car and admired the flames. "You see, Marcus," he said, lighting a cigarette, "most people think revenge is about anger." Marcus said nothing. The king smiled wider. "But anger is boring." Across the city, Victor Hale's empire continued to crumble piece by piece. Businesses ruined. Safe houses exposed. Allies disappearing overnight. By the third night, Victor finally understood something important. This wasn't revenge. It was practice. So Victor picked up his phone and called the only person insane enough to answer. The grinning king picked up immediately. "Hello, Harvey," the king said happily. Victor's voice stayed calm. "Enough games. Let's end this." The king grinned. "Oh good," he said. "I was getting bored." The meeting place was the Iron Haven Zoo. At night, the park looked nothing like a place for families. The lights were dim. Empty cages cast long shadows across cracked pavement. Every corner felt like a trap waiting to close. Marcus stood beside the grinning king at the entrance gate. "You picked the zoo," Marcus whispered. The king smiled. "Theme parks are expensive." Inside the park, Victor Hale had come prepared. Dozens of armed men waited between the exhibits. Spotlights lit the central plaza, where Victor stood calmly beside two hostages. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. His wife. Alive. Shaking. But alive. Victor raised his phone slightly as Marcus and the king approached. "One call," Victor said. "Everyone here opens fire." The grinning king slowly clapped his hands. "Oh, Harvey. This is adorable." Victor ignored the joke. His eyes stayed locked on Marcus. "You see," Victor said quietly. "I knew he wouldn't kill you. You're too useful to him." Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't stop staring at his wife. Victor stepped closer. "This ends tonight," he continued. "You brought him here. Good. Now step away and take your wife." For 1 second, hope flickered inside Marcus. Maybe this could still end without blood. The grinning king suddenly walked forward. Too slowly. Victor laughed. "Stop right there." But something had already changed. The king had removed his glove earlier. Marcus hadn't noticed when. When the king brushed past Victor, his bare hand moved like lightning. A sharp line of red appeared across Victor's wrist. Victor screamed. Gunfire erupted across the zoo as chaos exploded in every direction. The zoo exploded into chaos. Gunfire cracked through the night as Victor Hale's men opened fire from every direction. Spotlights shattered. Glass cages broke apart. Animals roared and scattered in panic. Marcus dropped to the ground, covering his head as bullets ripped through metal fences and concrete paths. For a moment it felt like the entire world had gone insane. Through the smoke and flashing lights, Marcus saw the grinning king walking calmly through the battlefield, like he was strolling through a park. Victor Hale clutched his bleeding wrist, collapsing to one knee. His phone fell from his hand as blood poured onto the pavement. The king smiled down at him. "Oops," he said softly. Victor tried to stand, but the pain was too much. Around them, the fight was turning into something worse. Masks appeared in the chaos. Strange figures moved through the smoke, tearing apart Victor's soldiers one by one. Marcus spotted his wife lying on the ground near a broken railing. He crawled toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey! Hey!" he whispered, grabbing her shoulders. She was alive, but terrified. Marcus helped her stand, ready to run, ready to escape before the whole place collapsed. Then the king suddenly appeared beside them. His smile was wider than ever. "Well," he said cheerfully, "that was fun." Marcus froze. For the first time that night, a horrible thought entered his mind. Victor Hale was losing. The war was already over. And if Victor was finished? Then Marcus had nothing left protecting him from the man standing right beside him. Victor Hale collapsed against the stone railing of the zoo plaza, blood dripping from his wrist, onto the pavement. His men were already scattering. Some ran. Some were dragged away into the smoke by shadows Marcus couldn't fully see. The entire plan had fallen apart in seconds. The grinning king stepped closer, hands in his pockets, humming softly like someone enjoying a quiet evening walk. Victor tried to lift his gun with his good hand. The king gently kicked it away. "Careful," he said with a grin. "You'll hurt yourself." Victor glared up at him, breathing hard. "You think this is victory?" Victor spat. The king crouched beside him, studying his face like a curious scientist. "No," he said calmly. "This is bookkeeping." Marcus stood frozen a few steps away, holding his wife. He expected the king to finish Victor right there. But the king didn't. Instead, he leaned closer to Victor and whispered something only Marcus partly heard. "You're my cash register now." Victor's eyes widened. "And someday," the king continued softly, "I'm going to kill you." The king stood up and dusted off his coat. But not tonight. Behind them, Victor's remaining men were already gone. Police sirens echoed faintly somewhere in the distance. The grinning king turned toward Marcus like the whole night had been nothing more than a small errand. "Come on," he said cheerfully. Marcus blinked. "What?" The king smiled wider. "We're going out." Marcus looked down at his wife, expecting this to finally be the moment he was free. But the king had already started walking toward the zoo exit. And somehow, Marcus knew, the real nightmare hadn't even started yet. Marcus thought the nightmare had ended at the zoo. Victor Hale was defeated. His wife was alive. The gunfire had stopped. Police sirens were growing louder in the distance. For a moment Marcus believed he had survived. He was wrong. The grinning king drove through Ironhaven like it was the best night of his life. Music blasted from the car radio while city lights slid across the windshield. Marcus sat in the passenger seat silent. "You look tense," the king said, grinning. "Tonight was a success." Marcus didn't answer. They stopped outside a small convenience store. The king walked inside, laughing to himself. A few seconds later, the sound of breaking glass echoed out into the street. Marcus flinched. Then the king came back out, cheerful as ever, like someone who had just finished grocery shopping. "Next stop," he said happily. The car kept moving. Another building. Another locked door. Another strange moment where the king acted like the world was just a giant stage built for his entertainment. Hours passed. Marcus finally understood something sitting on the cold floor of a random apartment they had broken into. Honesty didn't save him. Loyalty didn't protect him. Surviving the grinning king had nothing to do with being useful, or brave, or clever. It meant something much worse. Marcus wasn't free. He belonged to the joke now. The grinning king looked down at him and laughed. "So Marcus," he asked casually, "what's the moral of the story?" Marcus stared at the floor. He already knew the answer. In Ironhaven, sometimes surviving is the real punchline. Comment 1 for the next part.